Chapter 28. We arrived back at our room with about 20 minutes to spare. Collapsing onto the sofa in the common area, I decided it was a good thing we'd needed to return to the hotel. I was far more tired than I wanted to admit. Alexis caught the brief flash of exhaustion as it crossed my face and lifted one brow, letting me know she knew how tired I was. I stuck my tongue out at her. I knew it was childish, but I was too tired to care. Alexis laughed. "What?" Caden asked, returning from checking for intruders in the bedroom where he and Alexis slept. What? Devon came back from doing the same in our room. Alexis laughed. Caden said to Devon, then turned back to Alexis. "What is it?" Alexis looked at me without a word. "She's laughing at me," I admitted. "Why?" Devon wanted to know. "Because I stuck my tongue out at her." Caden scowled. "Why would you do that? It's not very respectful." "I wasn't sticking my tongue out to our Harmonia," I explained. "I was doing it to my friend." "Oh," he seemed somewhat mollified. "Still. It's no big deal." Alexis dismissed the issue. "Do you want to change before Ridges gets here?" she asked me, changing the subject. I looked down at myself. "I'd like to put on something more comfortable," I admitted. "I dressed this morning so nothing would show. But now I'm a bit warm, and it would be good to put on something cooler." With effort, I pushed myself off the couch and went to change. I put on a casual, lightweight dress. The bright colors made me feel better and the soft cloth wasn't too tight against the bruises on my ribs. The short sleeves exposed the bruises on my forearms that were starting to yellow around the edges, but I didn't care. I left my feet bare because I was more comfortable that way. I went back to the main room and glanced around. Alexis came back a few minutes later, dressed in the same jeans she'd worn this morning, but she had on a loose t-shirt instead of the button-up blouse she'd had on earlier. "Is he here yet?" she asked. "Not yet." I fell back onto the couch where I'd been earlier. Alexis came over and sat down beside me. "How are you feeling?" "Really?" she asked. I glanced at Devon and Caden where they sat at the dining table talking quietly. "Tired," I admitted. "More tired than I really want to admit." She nodded. "I thought you'd tire more quickly than you'd like. After Ridges leaves, you can take a nap, then we'll see about feeding you again." "I feel like all I do is eat and sleep." "I know you do, but it's helping you heal." She ran her fingers softly over the bruise on one of my forearms, so softly it tickled but didn't hurt. "See, it's deep purple and blue, but the edges are turning yellow and green." She ran her finger over the edges, showing me what she was talking about. "You know, if you were human, that wouldn't happen for a week or more." I nodded. "I know, but I'm bored." "Where's your PCD?" she asked. "Maybe you've got something to read that can distract you." "It's in my purse. I'll dig it out after Ridges leaves and see if I can find something that interests me." I nodded, agreeing that reading was a good idea. We sat in silence for a few minutes, my head tilted back, resting on the back of the sofa and my eyes closed. I was starting to doze when a knock sounded on the suite door. I jerked my head up, startled, and started to stand to answer the door, but Alexis stopped me with a hand on my arm. She nodded silently at Caden, who'd already gotten up, and was headed to open the door. He stopped before touching the door and inhaled, using scent to see who was on the other side of the door. Apparently satisfied, he opened the door and let in 3 men. Bennett led the group with Ridges right behind him. A new man brought up the rear. He was dressed in an inexpensive suit and tie. Bennett checked the room like he had on their first visit, scenting the air to be sure that only the 4 of us were in the suite. Satisfied of his boss's safety, he stepped aside and let Ridges came farther into the room, the newcomer right behind him. I started to get up and greet Ridges, but he held out one hand. No, save your energy. He said. I wouldn't have come, but I needed to ask you some questions, Nickie. What do you need to know? This is William Bolser. He's part of my pack and a detective on SPD. He has some things to show you and a few questions to ask. All right. I turned to the new man. I thought he probably wasn't much taller than me, maybe 5 feet 10 inches. He was in his late 30s and starting to thicken around the middle, but still fit. He had a bushy mustache that seemed out of place on his face. What do you want to know? I asked, totally at ease with the idea of a police officer questioning me. Do you recognize this man? He held out a PCD with a photo on the screen. I looked at the picture for a moment. The face seemed vaguely familiar, but it wasn't someone I knew. He seems familiar somehow, but I don't know who he is. Devon sat down beside me and wrapped one arm around me, silently offering both comfort and his energy. The detective reached into a jacket pocket and pulled out a small press-to-seal bag with some kind of cloth inside. He pulled it open and held it out to me. Do you recognize this scent? I took the bag and sniffed the contents carefully, made a face, and held it back out to him. That's the guy from the back of the van, the one who kept kicking me. Devon's arm tightened around me. He took the bag back, sealing it before stuffing it back into his pocket. The one you hit before you got free? He asked, watching me carefully. I nodded. Yeah. How many times did you hit him? Just once, but with both hands. I'd broken the chain holding the cuffs to the floor, but the cuffs were still on. Did you see anyone else in the van? I shook my head. No, I heard a couple of them talking, but I don't know if I would recognize their voices. I know there were at least 4 of them, but I couldn't focus enough to pick out individual voices when I opened my shields to see what they were going to do with me. He nodded, seeming to consider what course to take next. He looked at Ridges. I followed his gaze in time to see Ridges nod at him. We found the van. It had the man in the rear dead, his skull had been caved in. He watched carefully as I cringed slightly at the news. I didn't try to kill him, but I didn't check my blow either. I was desperate to get out of there. He nodded, continuing. It looks like a single blunt force trauma to the head. There's nothing in the van to trace back to you, but I scented a kitsune and asked if there had been any trouble. He motioned towards the Anakitos, sitting at the other end of the table in front of him. He brought me to see you. From what I could tell, you're right, there were 4 in the van, the one you killed, and 3 more, all human. The dead man had several small darts in his pocket. Testing revealed that they contained ketamine, a strong drug often used as an anesthetic on both humans and animals. It sometimes goes by the street name Animal Tranks. He seemed to be watching our reactions as he gave us the information. That's one of the few things that acts quickly on us. It knocks us out pretty easily, but it takes a lot of it to keep us out. We burn through it fast. Alexis spoke up. From what I can tell, William continued, these guys had no idea they were after anything but a human. The chain was a standard bike chain, and the tranquilizers are nothing out of the ordinary. They could be stolen or bought off the street. I assume the cuffs were standard? He looked at Ridges. Standard police issue cuffs. Devon said. They're issued all over the country to police officers, corrections officers, and MPs, not to mention available on the net to anyone who cares to order them. William nodded. That's what I suspected. He glanced around the room, looking at all of us in turn. This is both good and bad. If they didn't know she wasn't just like any other human, we can assume that's not why they targeted her. But it leaves us with few leads as to who they were and why she was taken. We have an identity on this guy. He waved his PCD indicating the man in the photo, and a few names of known associates, but if you never saw them, we have no way for you to confirm if it was them. He was looking at me again. It will also make it harder to track down why they were after her. Caden said from where he stood near the door. Yes. William agreed, looking back at him for a moment. We're looking into financial records for this guy and his known associates, but so far, nothing. I guess it's better to know something, even if it's that we don't have anything yet. I glanced around the room as I took Devon's hand. What can we do to help? Devon asked. Right now? Nothing. Ridges said. Let her heal and keep her safe. I've contacted Bill about this kid you told me about, this Brandon. He's looking into his whereabouts, and he'll get back to me. I'll take care of things on this end, at least until you're in top shape and more able to participate. I don't like not being able to go hunt them down. Devon growled. But at the same time, I know she's not up to hunting them down yet, and I'm not willing to leave her, not with anyone. So I appreciate the help you're giving us here. It's the least I can do. After all, you were attacked in my territory. I should have seen to it that you stayed safe. From what we know, this isn't something you could have predicted or prevented. As far as I'm concerned, the only ones to blame are the ones who took me and whoever paid them to do it. I said, trying to smooth any ruffled feathers. Ridges nodded slowly. All right, I'll accept that. But if there's anything you need, let me know. I'll do my best to see you get it. Actually, Alexis spoke up. We could use someplace to run. Nickie can shift here, and it will speed healing, but with everything going on it would benefit us all to get out and run, to expend some of our nervous energy and aggression. We have a place not far from the city where the pack runs. I'll have my assistant make the arrangements for you to have access, and contact you with the details. Is that good? Ridges offered. Wonderful. She smiled back at him, satisfied. If you need anything else, please let me know. He pulled a small card out of his jacket pocket and offered it to Alexis. This is my private number. Contact me anytime, day or night, should something more come up. Alexis took the card and only glanced at it before sticking it into the pocket of her jeans. Thanks, she said. I appreciate it. Ridges looked at the detective. If you're through here? Without a word, William nodded, and Ridges turned back to Alexis, Devon, and I. And if you're good for the moment? Alexis nodded. Then we'll leave you to the rest of your afternoon. He started for the door. Thank you for answering our questions, and I'll let you know what we find out, he said, stopping beside the door to wait for William and Bennett. Thanks for letting us know what you found out so far. Alexis stood up to see him out. And thanks again for letting us use Packland to go for a run. That's not a problem, standard courtesy. I should have thought to offer. He waved his hand in the air, dismissing the issue. Bennett left first, and I saw him standing in the doorway for a moment, blocking Ridges from leaving as he looked up and down the hallway, making sure it was safe before stepping out into the hall and letting the others follow him. After Caden closed and locked the door, he turned back to the rest of us. Well, what now? He asked. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to go lay down for a while. I released Devon's hand and started to push myself up. I'll come with you, Devon volunteered. I won't tell you not to come, but you don't have to, I said. I plan on reading for a little while, then probably taking a nap before it's time to eat again. Let me get you settled in, then if you don't mind I'll come back out, he suggested. If that's what you want. I went to the kitchenette where I'd set my purse and dug out my PCD before heading into the bedroom. I opened my eyes to find the room deep in shadows, meaning I'd slept for several hours. I dressed and ran a brush through my sleep-tangled hair before going into the main room. I spotted Caden first. He was sitting in one of the overstuffed chairs in the same conversation area where we'd sat to talk to Ridges earlier, reading. He looked up as I stepped into the room. His movement caught Devon's attention, and he looked up from where he'd been laying on the sofa, playing some game on his PCD. I glanced around and found Alexis in the small kitchen area, gathering plates and flatware to take to the table. There you are, she said, catching sight of me. We ordered Chinese. It should be here any time, and there's still some leftover pizza if you want that, she said cheerfully. I blinked slowly, my mind still slow and sleep-clouded. I'll wait for now. I went over to the sofa and tapped Devon's foot, wordlessly asking him to share the seat. He swung his feet off the end of the couch, sitting up in one smooth motion. Hey babe, you feeling better? I turned my head to look at him and blinked once, twice, then scowled without a word. I was interrupted mid-thought by Caden's chuckle. I turned and pinned him with an unhappy look. Not a morning person, huh? He asked. I scowled deeper and turned back to Devon. Yeah, I feel better. I slept harder than I thought I would, and my brain's not really awake yet. Devon laughed softly, leaning over to place a soft kiss on my forehead. I've found that when she's like this, it's best to give her a few minutes to wake up. But it's not often I have to, he said to Caden. I sat silently for several minutes, letting my mind wake up. Before I was really ready to talk, a knock sounded on the door, and Devon got up to answer it. I wasn't paying much attention to what was going on around me, but Devon, walking past me to the table carrying 2 large bags of food, caught my attention. I got up and followed him to the table. I sat down while he unpacked square containers from the bags. He opened them as he set them on the table so we could see what was in them. I waited until he finished and started putting together a plate, planning to wait my turn to serve myself. I was surprised when Devon set the plate he'd been fixing in front of me. Eat up, he said. We're gonna go for a run tonight, you're gonna need plenty of fuel. Thanks. I glanced up at him with a thankful smile before picking up my fork. Ridge's assistant called? I started digging into the food in front of me. She did. Alexis was making a plate for herself. She gave me directions to get out there and all the info we need. We'll go after dinner. Is it going to be a long trip? I mentally prepared myself for a long drive out of the city. No, should take us about 45 minutes to get there. Oh, I was surprised. That's not long at all. When we finished eating, I grabbed a sweater from the bedroom and slipped on a pair of sandals, while Alexis gathered a bag before we left. Devon and I sat together in the back seat of the car, curled together as we watched the scenery pass. It didn't take us long to get to I-5, then the lights of the city sped by, but we didn't stay on it for long. Caden directed the car onto Interstate 90, which led onto a long bridge over Lake Washington and onto Mercer Island, before taking us over a much shorter bridge and back onto the mainland. We continued through an area that was mostly urban with lots of greenery. I thought it would have been a great place to live if you saw the sun more often. The road soon started the slightly twisty routing of a large highway, winding its way through mountains, and as the car climbed its way to our destination, the scenery changed from the signs of human habitation to thick forest, but a different forest from what we were used to. It was hard to tell much at the speed we were traveling, but I knew I was going to get a chance to shift and run and see it all from a much closer perspective. What remained of the day was rapidly fading as Caden turned off I-90 onto a small mountain highway. He followed that road for a few miles before turning off onto a dirt road, stopping in front of a large gate and rolling down his window. 5,834,693. Alexis read the numbers off her PCD while Caden punched the code into a keypad outside his window. The gate slowly rolled open, allowing us to pass. Once we were inside, the gate closed again. Caden drove on, going slowly over the rough, bumpy road for about another mile before the road opened into a clearing large enough to park probably 50 or more cars. Wow, I looked around. That was unexpected. It's good though, Caden said. The poor road will keep most people who get past the gate from getting back this far, unless they know where they're going. I nodded. That makes sense. Caden parked the car in one corner of the clearing, and we all climbed out. I looked around, taking in the sights and smells of the forest. I noticed the air was damper than the forests back home. I left the sweater I'd never put on in the seat of the car, and like everyone else, I started peeling off my clothes. I folded my dress and laid it on the seat before adding my bra and panties to the pile. Unsure of the ground under my feet, I kept my sandals on as I pushed the door closed. I slipped the straps off my heels, but continued to stand on the bottoms as I bent into position and I focused on my wolf form, willing my body into that shape. The familiar tingling spread across my skin. I felt my bones and muscles start to shift. I wasn't prepared for the sharp stabbing pains that came from my forearms and ribs. I didn't let them break my concentration, but I couldn't stop the whimper of pain that escaped. Soon the tingling subsided, telling me the shift was over. I sat still for a moment, breathing as I recovered from the unexpected pain shifting had brought, only to be startled by Devon brushing against me in his wolf form, his nose ruffling the fur of my neck. "Hey," I sent to him. "What's up? Are you all right?" You cried out while shifting. I picked up from him. "I'm fine, my ribs and arms hurt during the shift, but I'm fine now." "Is that normal?" His mental voice was concerned. I tilted my head to one side, not sure of the answer. "Alexis?" I asked, unsure if she'd be able to pick up my mental voice. "Yes?" came her gentle voice. "When I shifted, there were sharp pains in my ribs and arms. Is that normal?" "It's not uncommon for bones that have been broken to be painful during shifting until they're fully healed," she said. "But not always. It seems to be kind of hit or miss." "It's normal," I sent to Devon, not knowing if he'd heard her. "It will stop once the breaks are completely healed." He nodded and turned toward the forest. "Let's go." I followed him into the dark forest, recognizing only a little of the foliage around us. There were more broad-leaved trees than I was used to, and though there were some pine trees, they were much larger than the ones at home. I knew that Douglas firs were common up here, but they didn't grow anywhere near this large where I came from. The ground was damp and spongy beneath my paws. It gave me the impression of walking on the squishy playground surfaces that have replaced cement and dirt in so many places. There was a whole new array of scents, too. I could smell all the small animals that made the forest their home: mice, owls, a small family of rabbits not too far away. I picked up the familiar scent of pine, but it was buried under others I was less familiar with. One scent I did recognize, and was surprised to do so, was cedar. I didn't know there was cedar in this forest. I followed the scent, trying to find a cedar tree, because I'd never seen one before. I was surprised by the resemblance of both the trunk and the leaves to the juniper I was familiar with. Intrigued with what I'd found so far, I continued to investigate until Devon nudged me in the side with his head. "What?" I asked. "Run with me." He nipped me on the shoulder and ran a few feet away before stopping and turning around to see if I was following. I tilted my head to one side. "If you think I'm going to chase you through an unfamiliar forest, you've lost your mind." I sent to him, then I leapt forward and ran into him at full speed, knocking him to the ground. "You have to chase me." I sent a laugh through our mental connection as I took off running. I dodged trees and leapt over fallen logs, pushing through low branches and enjoying the damp slap of leaves in my face as I tried to outrun him. I could hear the whisper of his paws hitting the damp ground beneath us as he scrambled to his feet and raced to catch up. I continued to run, zigging and zagging through the dark forest, barely able to make out trees in time to dodge them. In moments, Devon had caught up with me. He ran beside me, bumping his side into mine as we moved together to avoid colliding with trees. "Did you really think that was going to work?" he asked, as we both sailed over a downed log. "Not really," I laughed back. "But it was fun." "I'm glad you enjoyed it." We made a big circle and ended up back in the clearing a while later, slowly padding back to the car as we caught our breath. "You done?" Devon asked. "Yeah, but I don't think Alexis and Caden are back." "Doesn't matter, the car's not locked." We went to our individual sides of the car and shifted. I quickly stood and shivered as I opened the door and dressed as quickly as I could, before climbing into the car and closing the door. I put my sweater on and wrapped it tightly around my body, hugging myself as I tried to slow the shivering. Devon quickly pulled his sweater on over his t-shirt and got into his side of the car, swinging his legs in and closing the door with his feet still bare. He pulled on his socks but ignored his shoes as he picked up his jacket off the seat between us and slid over. He opened his jacket and pulled me up against him, spreading the open jacket over both of us. With the warmth of his chest pressed against my back and his jacket wrapped around the rest of my body, the shivering soon passed. It wasn't that the temperature was all that cold, but the change from the warmth of fur to bare skin chilled me if the air was even slightly cool, not to mention damp. I snuggled up to Devon for several minutes, content just to be held in his arms, but after a while I moved, pulling my legs up into the seat beside me and turning in his arms until I could easily stretch up and kiss his cheek. He rubbed his cheek against mine for a moment before settling his mouth over mine. He kissed me gently for a few minutes before pulling away. He twisted around, grabbing the bag Alexis has packed before we left the hotel and dug through it. When he turned back to me, he was holding a pair of meal replacement shakes. "We're going to need to get some more of these." He popped the top on one and handed it to me. "Thanks." I took the can from him and tipped it up, draining the can with one long drink. I dropped the empty can in an empty cup holder and turned back to Devon. I was expecting him to be drinking the other shake, but I found him holding the second can out to me. "What about you?" I took the can. "I'm good." He watched as I tipped the second can up and took a drink. "I'm more worried about you. You're still healing." By the time I'd finished the second shake, Caden and Alexis had returned from their run. They shifted, dressed, and we headed back into town.